Obviously, this is the part of the day where we have a growers panel, and the growers panel is consisting of three individual growers that have experience, obviously exporting to Japan and other markets. Our first panellist today, I'll start from the middle of the panel there, is Lucy Gregg, who's the Marketing and Business Development Manager at Reid Fruits. She's been Marketing and Business Development Manager for the company since September 2013. Previously, she was the Business Development Manager of Fruit Growers of Tasmania. She currently sits on the board of Cherry Growers Australia and chairs both the Cherry Growers Australia Marketing and Promotions Committee and the Tasmanian Primary Industry Biosecurity Action Alliance. Ms Gregg was former President of Eat Well Tasmania and is currently a member of the Tasmanian Food Industry Advisory Committee and the Tasmanian Fruit and Vegetable Industry Task Force. Reid Fruits as a company is a family business that was started in 1856, and in 2000 it diversified its business to include cherry production, buying a 700-acre cropping and grazing property located in the Derwent Valley. Reid Fruit grows annually approximately 1,000 tonnes of fresh cherries for export and for export and domestic markets. They use modern production systems and state-of-the-art technology. Our other panellist today is Schreurs. Chris had an interesting and varied background, having returned to Australia 12 months ago to take over the family business and operations with two cousins within the family. He's part of a third-generation farming family and is presently focused on expanding the business throughout Southeast Asia. He has a Bachelor of Science and a Bachelor of Business Banking and Finance and has spent 8 years in the financial markets, 4 in London and 4 in Singapore. During his time overseas, he saw opportunity for expansion into Asia, and his family convinced him to come home and return to the farm and take the reins with his two other cousins. He's presently working and focused on exporting of celery and leeks. Our third panellist is James, who is the export manager at Momack Produce. He has an agricultural science degree with honours from the University of Sydney. He's a young agricultural professional, originally from a family farm in Tasmania also. He worked as an agronomist in the horticultural industry prior to starting work for Momack. James has been working with Momack for 5 years and coordinates all of the exports for the company. He's also a committee member for the Australian Asparagus Council. So we're an esteemed company. Right, to get things moving, the format will be I'll ask a few questions, a bit of background about the guys. There'll be a roving mic, so free-flowing discussion is what we're aiming for. Feel free to ask questions and interact in the best way that you know how. So firstly, to kick things off, perhaps James, did you want to give us a little bit of background about how you came to be exporting overseas?
Yeah. Is the microphone, everyone hear that? So 5 years ago I started work with Momack Produce, a fairly well-established asparagus company selling domestically and into export markets throughout Asia. Japan's always been our biggest market, and where the growth in the industry started from sort of the mid-80s is where sort of the industry took off from there and developed right through until around 2000 was probably the peak volume into Japan, and since then it's stabilised and had a slight downturn in total exports from Australia to Japan for a number of reasons, the main one being competition from other markets and the Japanese domestic season going on for longer than what it used to, sort of cutting out of season and learning through different varieties and different management techniques to do that. Basically we're wholly an asparagus company, growing, packing and selling from Australia to anywhere in Asia.
And how about you, James? Can you tell us a bit of background about yourself? Sorry, Chris.
That's all right. So basically our company is in a bit of a unique situation where about 15 years ago we were exporting directly to Japan and other areas in Southeast Asia such as Hong Kong and Taiwan. A few years later that basically declined quite rapidly for us due to the onset of celery mosaic virus in the paddock that we found it diminished the quality of the product, and so we had to concentrate on supplying the local market and then obviously working out a way how to manage the mosaic virus, which obviously decreased shelf life in the product. So we are now we've solved basically that problem of managing it, and we're seeing a great interest in opportunities really to look at different ways of packaging and presenting our product for an international markets. I don't think that for celery in particular, the whole bunch celery or whole leek celery or whole leeks is a way to promote due to massive competitions from America and other cheaper countries. So we're looking at value adding areas, and we're making some inroads on that already.
Mm. And how about you, Lucy?
I guess the history is that Tasmania's had market access to Japan for apples for probably a couple of decades now, and originally it was for Fuji apples, and that's originally where Reid Fruits became involved in exporting to Japan. Then we got access for multiple varieties of apples into Japan, and during those trips to Japan, Mr. Tim Reid, owner of Reid Fruits, came across the Japanese cherries, and from that developed an orchard in the Derwent Valley. Originally consisted of 30 hectares of Japanese cherries, and the balance was in dark sweet cherries. We've now got to the point where the majority of the orchard is now dark sweet cherries, and the Japanese cherries are actually down to just 1.8 hectares. And there's a whole lot of reasons behind that, which we can potentially discuss.
Would you mind elaborating a bit on that right now?
Yes, the Japanese cherries have failed to get traction in the Japanese market, and I think Richard spoke about that probably earlier on for a couple of reasons. One is I think the tastes are changing and the consumer acceptance is changing, and the other one is that the Japanese are quite loyal to their own products. So whilst we are counter-seasonal, we've failed to actually get any traction with them, and found that the dark cherries have been a lot more accepted into that market.
Chris, you talked about the opportunities that you could see in the future. Do you want to perhaps explore those a bit?
Yeah, I think with celery in particular, it's a product that needs to be innovated and re-commercialised a lot. And I guess with the way consumer behaviours are happening, particularly in places like Japan, where you do have, like it was explained earlier, the smaller households, smaller fridge sizes, eating on the go is becoming more prominent. There is definitely a market for something like a pre-cut. How we market that, how we label that is something that we need to focus on now, and we're very keen on establishing relationships, ongoing relationships, because one of the things that we found 20 years ago is that we became a bit of a stopgap for the American market, and that wasn't great for planning and for business for us. So we want to change that around and get rid of that stopgap and really just focus on a consistent supply. And if you have a good product with a high quality that's consistent, I think it will work quite well.
And James, from your perspective, do you see opportunities in this market going forward?
Yeah, with regard to asparagus, as I touched on earlier, and as Onishi-san touched on during what he was talking about with the vegetable consumption in Japan, they traditionally will buy from Japan local product first over any imported product, which of course means that if they're growing it, which they tend to, and they're growing for longer and longer in September, which is the first month of our season, it creates a few difficulties there for us. So the main opportunity for us with asparagus is to extend our season longer further into December, where there is a bit of a worldwide shortage typically of asparagus.
We talk about opportunities, and we've mentioned in that same breath some of the challenges. What are some of the potential showstoppers, or the ones, the issues that you really consider the most important that need to be addressed to make the market prosperous? James?
Yeah. One of the big issues for us, and Richard touched on it before in his talk, is fumigation in Japan. We're finding that a lot more and more of our shipments are being fumigated upon entry for a number of reasons, the main one being thrips. So that's something that we're looking at different ways to try and overcome that. We've got a few things that we're putting in place for this year to try and lower our fumigation rate, because obviously asparagus is highly perishable and it reduces the shelf life quite dramatically. So that's a big problem that we're constantly trying to overcome. There are other things that this year there's now a Melbourne-Tokyo direct flight going 4 times a week, which is a big bonus for us because it means that the product can get there 12 hours quicker than what it can use or transshipping via one of the Asian hubs in Singapore or Hong Kong or Bangkok. So that's a positive for us because the product will arrive fresher than what it otherwise would have.
Mm. And what about you, Lucy, in terms of logistics of getting your product, highly perishable, into the market?
Yes, cherries are highly perishable. Look, we actually don't have any issues in getting the product to market quickly. We have a reliable service across Bass Strait to Melbourne, and then it's straight on a plane over to Tokyo. But I guess our biggest barriers are in relation to market access. For cherries, that also revolves around the costs of compliance, and we have a systems approach into Japan. So that's a series of trapping and monitoring, and then we have to have a visit from a MAF officer before we can actually start exporting. So currently, I think last year, I think we're the only exporters for cherries to Japan. So it's a fairly costly exercise, and you need to have volume to actually substantiate continuing the export. So that's one of our challenges going forward, is making sure that we move enough volume to cover all the costs associated with sending to a protocol market. In relation to apples, currently no apples are going into Japan because of the methyl bromide fumigation again. We don't have access to methyl bromide facilities in Hobart any longer, or readily accessed can those methyl bromide. So we're certainly interested in, we get inquiries all the time for apples into Japan, and that's potentially where we would like to see further discussions about other treatment processes, and certainly, you know, irradiation would be one of those which would allow quick and effective export to a country like that.
Mm. Chris, before you mentioned that you had been involved in markets, exited markets and looking to re-engage in markets, can you tell us a bit about the rationale and some of the learnings you had from previously operating in that environment?
I guess 20 years ago we had a big challenge in trying to get stuff across to Asia in general. We used to use shipping as a form of that, and we quite often found that it got stuck on the wharfs in Melbourne. There was a period of time where the wharfies weren't doing much there, and that killed us basically in a lot of regards. And the shipment would arrive, and you open the door, and it would be just a pile of slush at the other end. So I recommend not doing shipping for something like a perishable or celery. So we had a lot of challenges around that, and I think now going forward, particularly with a commodity like we do, is when we're going to be pre-packing it, it extends the shelf life. The way we're doing it and the way we're treating it, we're looking into new technologies of water treatment that is non-chemical based, and it has proven through HAL research that's Horticulture Australia has done through Dr. Robert Premier, extends shelf life, can extend shelf life up to 3 to 4 days, and has a much better outcome. This unipolar thing that we do. So using technologies such as that, implementing that into your process line, looking at different ways of packaging and materials for that, I think it's very important to try and get that extra few days shelf life in a product such as celery. That then gives you the confidence to go forward to say, hey, you know, that extra 2 days flying it over, which I recommend doing, is going to be good for their market.
James, you talked before around some of the logistics and exporting and what's involved in that. Can you have any particular interesting stories that you want to relay about your experiences in the Japanese market and how perhaps it might be unique to other markets that you deal with? Yeah,
with logistics, there are always, issues that come up during the year. We've had issues where there's been someone of high power going on planes, so freight will be all offloaded because it's seen as a high risk. So we've had issues where produce has been stuck in Thailand for a couple of days before they can get it back on, and then there's a priority system with seafood generally taking priority over asparagus. And a few years ago, it was 2 years ago I think, the season in November, we had a really hot day, and it was about 40 degrees and the pilot wouldn't take our produce, and then the same sort of thing happened. We got bumped off 3 more flights, and then we ended up with a total claim to the airlines on that, which is always a hurdle, and we still are waiting on our money for that. So if you have, it's a high-risk industry with air freight, and airlines are sometimes slow to come to the party with refunding on claims.
Does anyone else on the panel have a particular experience in that regard as well?
No, not me. No. Not for airlines. No.
Look, air freight's certainly an issue, but potentially not to Japan. We typically have fairly good access, but from Tasmania's perspective, we often are competing against abalone, rock lobster and oysters, and they do get priority over horticultural produce typically.
What about government regulation? You mentioned methyl bromide for you, Lucy, but government regulations that have been barriers or assisting for any of you?
I'm looking forward to see what this free trade agreement comes out like. Once it's signed, I think it might be extremely beneficial for us with Japan, because we're still waiting for it to be formalised, and so we don't know a lot of the details as yet. So hopefully that will help things. If the Australian dollar went down a little bit, that'll be helpful as well, I think.
Easy things to control.
Yeah, easy things to control. Yeah, exactly right.
From a more practical sense, what about things such as development of new varieties and technological solutions to packaging? Are they things that you're all actively working on right now?
Certainly from our perspective, we are putting a lot more energy into packaging, particularly for the Asian market. There is a lot more emphasis on pre-packs, and we saw that from Richard's presentation. And certainly we know that cherries being a high-end gift, there is a lot more emphasis on the packaging, and we're seeing that particularly in China around Chinese New Year, and putting a lot of energy into developing more gift-type scenarios. So certainly in the Japanese market, we think we can do a lot more in that area. The trouble that we have is the fact that we normally ship in 5 kilo or 2 kilo cartons. Once we start pre-packing, we're adding a lot more volume for less weight, and the product's getting a lot more expensive. So that's consequently why a lot of the pre-packing is done in Japan. And one of the interesting things is that we do notice that the Japanese like Japanese packaging, whereas the Chinese, for instance, actually like it very Australian, because then they can see it's imported. So it just goes to show, and probably reinforcing what everyone's been saying this morning, is that you really need to know your market, and I think that's one of the critical things about Japan. It is a really unique market, and it's one that you have to do a lot of market research in before you start tackling it.
And is the journey worth it? Can you make a buck out of it?
Yes, certainly. And look, I think we've been in the market for over 10 years with cherries. We're actually looking at it strategically at the moment, and we're actually going to take a different tact from now on, because the market's evolved as well. I think the managers have changed, the systems of management have changed, online distribution of supermarkets, etc. So I think that also goes to prove the dynamics of the markets evolving as well, and you have to keep up with that too.
What about you, James or Chris? Can you make a buck out of it?
For it, James.
Yeah, certainly there's been good years and bad years, I think, like most industries. And as I explained before, there was a period in, I think, I wasn't in the industry, but around the 2000s where there was an oversupply of asparagus, and in combination with outside influences meant that there were a few difficult years. But overall, it's been a good industry. I guess Momack wouldn't have been doing it for so many years if they weren't making, a small margin the whole time. So yeah, I guess it's been pretty profitable over the years.
Yeah, in the past we made some money out of it until we had those issues that I explained earlier on. I certainly see it being really no different from sending it up to Sydney and flooding the market there and getting nothing in return. So it's rather to do that, why don't we look at extra markets that we can explore and potentially make some margin out of it. I think the fluctuations of the Australian dollar would help. Obviously, the high Australian dollar, if you can make a margin out of it today, with the expectation of the dollar going down against the yen, there's obviously a bit more profit margin in it for everyone. So there is always foreign exchange risk that you need to incorporate into your understanding, and when you're looking at your costs. making sure that you put a buffer in it for that. And if you do that, and if you look at all your costs properly, and you can streamline your processes and market yourself well, you can probably demand a little bit more for your premium product. Sure.
There's an opportunity for anybody to ask a question in the audience. Does anyone want to be brave and put their hand up and contribute? Perhaps some individual experiences you may have had exporting to Japan? I'll let you think. Up at the back there.
Will Gordon from Horticulture Australia. A question for James, I think. We've had some inquiries and some commentary also about New Zealand doing quite well with kabocha and products like that going into Japan, and just wondered if you had any experience in that area.
Yeah, so Momack had a kabocha business in Tasmania. There's no protocol to get kabocha from mainland Australia into Japan because of fruit fly, but you can out of Tasmania. So there was a period where I think the most volume that they did was around 1,000 tonnes one year, which is very small compared to what New Zealand and Mexico do. They're really large players in the market. And over the last few years, it's been challenging, the market for kabocha, and we stopped exporting 4 years ago now because we had issues with quality, and also because we were so small, we were really finding it difficult to get any traction in the market. Whether there's any opening in the future, with Mexico being as dominant as they are with such cheap labour, I think it's going to be very challenging, and they're extending their season when we had the window, which was late April, for arrival in Japan. So I don't think that there's a huge future for that from Tasmania into Japan, that's for sure.
Other comments? Just on the marketing you mentioned before, how do we go as a nation in terms of your individual products? Is marketing adequate? Is it important?
I think it's extremely important, yeah. I think living, as a consumer, when I lived over in Singapore, for an example, and I had a lot of expatriates there who lived and worked in Japan as well. Certainly is a niche market in all those areas, whether you have a high net worth individuals of the local base, or whether it's an expatriate lifestyle there. People are quite often look for their brands from home, or safe products, so to speak, and something different as well. Not everyone is comfortable going down to a wet market and buying broccoli from China or other products from other areas of the world. So yeah, I think your marketing strategy and the way you present your product is going to be key critical to finding a niche in these markets.
If, given you know what you know now, and you were starting up from scratch and had never entered the Japanese market before, any particular nuggets of advice or nuggets that you want to share with the audience of what not to do or what to do? Lucy, go on.
Look, I think the thing is that you have to do your market research, and I guess I've actually brought some apples up here, but I think one of the interesting things when we first started exporting apples to Japan, we were sending the massive big, in the fruit industry we would call punky, Fuji apples in there. And we were sort of saying, why can't we send these smaller apples? And they go, no, you have to have the big apple. There's a whole lot of tradition wrapped around the apple and how the family eat it, etc. When we sent the multiple varieties of apples in there, we found a couple of interesting things. One is they don't particularly like Tasmanian Fujis. They much prefer their own Fujis, but they certainly liked our Gala and our Jonagolds and our other varieties. But the thing is, we sent small apples, and the consumer said, we love these apples. Why can't we get these apples? The small ones are great. We can take them. So it was really interesting, after being sort of told, rote-like, that we have to send X product. Once we did our consumer research, we actually found it was Y product they were actually after. So I think that's probably really, really important. And I think also, from where we're going to now, is we're certainly starting doing some research into the health benefits of cherries, our own individual company. And that's certainly where we see there's massive opportunity in Asia, is the functional foods. and actually being able to note that if you ate a dozen cherries, every week, that you're going to alleviate gout or diabetes or something like that is certainly, and the Asians are a lot more switched onto that. So definitely we think there's opportunities there. And for branding, Asia's perfect for branding. I mean, all the Asian supermarkets thrive on branding. Dole and Sunkist, all those names are brand names in Asia. In fact, it's 10 times easier to market in Asia than it is in Australia. So certainly great opportunities.
Chris, do you have any views on the marketing side of things?
Oh, I just repeat what you said. I certainly think branding is extremely important. One of the first things that we did when we took over our company was rebrand, and with the foresight of trying to go into using it for the export market as well. Once you get that, you've got a good quality product in that brand, people identify with it, and it will keep your demand up. So yeah, if you've got a strong brand with a great quality in that, you're going to create more opportunities for yourselves. So yeah, it's brand and the way you market it, as you say, consumer research is vital, and also the quality of the product is extremely important.
We've got a couple more minutes of this particular part of the day. Is there anyone in the audience that'd like to, at the back there?
Yeah, just here, Reid, and here, question probably for Lucy, just trying to summarise what you're saying. Do you think it's better to do an Australian type product than to try and do a Japanese product in Australia? For example, the Japanese type cherries, because they like their own type of cherries, or?
Look, certainly our emphasis moving in will be on the dark cherries. I think that we've found that the Japanese cherries, it also gets back to something Richard touched on, very high expectations, and that's one of the things that finding when you're shipping a product from Tasmania, and Japanese cherries are highly perishable, more perishable than dark cherries. It's very difficult to meet consumer or customer expectations at the end. So certainly our emphasis will be on dark cherries, and from our experiences is that packaging that suits Japan is certainly the way to go, and it's probably one of the barriers is that because we're not sending huge volumes in there, is to dedicate a lot of packaging infrastructure to just one market. It's a little bit difficult. But we'll certainly work through that, and look, we think the opportunities are there, and sitting back now and having a reassessment of the market, we're looking forward to the opportunities.
Just sort of, I'll just add to that, like if I give you a hypothetical, just say they grow something called the Tokyo cherry, and the customer comes to you and says, can you grow the Tokyo cherry in Australia? Would you be likely to say that's a good idea, or you'd say, hey, I think we're better off doing, the Australian cherry?
Look, at this point in time, I think we'd be better off sticking to what we do best in the dark cherries. And I think it would be different if there was a partnership or significant ownership by Japanese. And I guess the feedlot in Tasmania is a classic example, whereas I think that's worked really successfully. I've actually worked at the feedlot. I used to do a lot of their quality assurance and environmental management QA systems there. Put Green Eye in, which is one of the Japanese QA programs. So I think that's a very different relationship. The co-investment is certainly would be a different way of doing it, rather than not being an individual trying to export. But certainly investment from one of the players in Japan would assist in that.
Last opportunity.
Do you guys view exports as a whole as something that you see you can increase your price per kilo and increase returns to the farm, or just another avenue to move the volume at roughly the same price as what you're getting now, if you know what I mean?
Well, with our business in particular, we make a commitment to export every week of the year. Every day we pack, we export. Every day we pack, we sell domestically as well. There are times when the domestic price will be higher, and there are times when the export price will be higher. I think the old sort of mentality that export, is always higher, or is generally going to return better, I don't think that's entirely true. But for us in particular, I guess it releases, it takes pressure off a market, and we'll sort of, not load up on a market. We'll push more to a market if we know there's a bit more of an opening there, trying to then increase the price somewhere else. So we use it as a way to manage and maintain our pricing as best as possible by keeping supply. Asparagus grows, its growth rate and its growth pattern is very unpredictable. So at times we have large volumes, at times we have really small volumes. So that makes it challenging, but we try and shift the produce around as much as possible to try and maintain a higher overall price. But some weeks there will be, or some periods, there will be lower price in the export market than what there is in domestic, but we commit and make sure that we fulfil our requirements even if there is potentially slightly more money somewhere else.
Well, on that note, thank you very much to our panellists, all three of you. Really appreciate your contributions and making your time on a Sunday. I've got a very little gift for you. Please join me in thanking them.